Okay, setting the alarm so that way I don't take up too much of y'all's time. Okay. So last time we were talking about alienation, authenticity, inauthenticity, and we had gotten into the will to power and some of the things that means. So one of the things that you would do as an existential therapist is to help people figure out who they are, help them figure out what that means, to help them exercise their will to power. You'll find that is liberationist in nature. Okay, liberationist, meaning helping people to be free from the constraints of culture, religion, family, etc., and help them embrace their own identity. And this can be a very important endeavor. So by way of example, I was working with a client a little while ago who came in for counseling because she had uncued panic attacks that out of the blue, on a regular basis, like sometimes 2-3 times a week, she would have these knock her on the ground with anxiety panic attacks, like chest heaving, heart palpitating, wondering if she was going to die, just these really, and they were just unrelated to anything in her life. And it was very puzzling. It was very difficult for her. It was very life-affecting, where she was starting to become what's called agoraphobic, where she didn't want to leave the house for fear of having a panic attack in class, at work, in public. And so she was increasingly withdrawing from the world, where she was starting to feel anxious, and then eventually she started feeling anxiety about her anxiety, if that makes any sense. So, and as much as she started to withdraw from school, from work, from public life and social life, her panic attacks didn't get any better. Okay? So one of the things that I did is I asked her to keep very careful track, a very detailed journal of what she did every day. And she was pretty good at staying busy. And I also noticed that she spoke to her mother once, sometimes twice a week. And that every time after she spoke to her mother, within an hour to 2 hours, she would have a massive panic attack. Okay? And she hadn't made the connection because, she's talking to mom on the phone, and then she hangs up the phone, and then she's going about her day, and then an hour later she has a panic attack while she's making toast or watching Netflix or, texting with a friend. And so she was associating her panic attacks with what she was doing in the moment that she was engaging in these particular activities. She hadn't made the connection that every time after she talks to her mother, within an hour or two, she has a panic attack. When she doesn't talk to her mother on a certain day, she doesn't have a panic attack those days. Okay? That's a very strong correlation, maybe even causative. So one of the things that we began to explore after a few weeks is her getting into her relationship with her mother. And she describes her mother as her best friend. And she describes her mother as somebody she can always turn to. And so I asked if she would just let me listen to one of mom's voicemails, because when mom calls and my client doesn't answer the call, mom always leaves a voicemail. And so I listened to the voicemail, and mom was very, very anxious and bordering on panic because her daughter didn't answer the phone. So James is here laughing, right? You can't make this stuff up. These stories write themselves. That mom's emotional well-being is dependent upon the daughter. Mom's very high-strung and emotionally wound up, and therefore what calms mom down is a conversation with her calm daughter, right?
Which then gets a rise out of her daughter.
It gets a rise out of her daughter because now what happens then is the daughter cannot be herself. She has to be an emotional caretaker for her mother, right? And so therefore she really strongly represses herself and becomes an emotional vessel for her mother's anxiety. And so it's not like emotional contagion where mom's anxiety is just simply causes anxiety in her daughter, my client, right? It's more complicated than that. where no, instead it's because the daughter hasn't spoken her authentic voice to her mother ever, because mother is so emotionally fragile that my client learned at a very young age that she has to suck in her emotions and choke down her emotions in order to emotionally caretake for mom, right? And so one of the things that we started talking about was her having a more authentic conversation with her mother, and then I got to witness this client have a full-blown panic attack in my office. Right? That's quite an event when you've got somebody who suddenly starts hyperventilating and heaving for breath and sweating through her clothes and feeling like she's going to die. And so, using the crisis intervention techniques that we teach in that class and helping her reground herself, etc. And it was a very dramatic event for both of us and very intense for her. And it she started using this discourse, this language that I caused her a panic attack. Now she can't come back for therapy because of the panic that I've caused, right? So therefore I am now a source of this particular very aversive experience. And it took a little bit in that particular session for me to just ask her to trust me and to try again, because it wasn't me that's creating the panic attack. Here's the hypothesis I had at the time. She's very, very loyal to mom, and she has this particular style of relating to mom, and because out of her care and compassion for mom, she relates in this way. To relate differently to mom would be disloyal to mom. And therefore, when I was asking her about the possibility of relating to mom differently, that would do mom violence, and therefore she was panicking about doing mom violence, right? So it was a really hard 6 months of counseling, because she didn't want to change the nature of the relationship, and she would rather continue to have panic attacks than renegotiate her relationship with her fragile mother.
And so this is after she'd found out that it was because she was masking her own true authentic self around her mother that she was having panic attacks. She would much rather keep that going
than change it. Because one of the things you'll find, and this is something, we'll talk about this again with Gestalt therapies, is a lot of reasons why people have a hard time changing is because of the relationships they're in. Now, an existentialist is going to strongly emphasize the personal responsibility we have. We'll get to responsibility. It's a manifestation of the will to power, right? That our personal responsibility to change if we need to. And they'll emphasize the individual part of it in the dynamic, while acknowledging the dynamic is important. Whereas for a Gestalt therapist, they'll talk about how everybody in the system can change through this, right? They tend to look at it about the relationships, whereas the existential psychologists tend to look at the individual. So it was tough, and it wasn't an easy negotiation. We had to get mom involved. And it was devastating for mom when mom found out there was a correlation between her conversations with her daughter and her daughter's panic attacks. And so it was just what the client was afraid of. And one of the really cool things about therapy, guys, you get to be psychic surgeons, and there's no anesthesia. You get to talk about trauma, and you get to disrupt these particular unhealthy ways of living that cause temporary pain. And that's what you get to do. And so some of you are saying, well, I can't be a therapist then. No, somebody needs to do it, and I'm hoping it's going to be you. That who else is willing to go to these very difficult, very anxiety, very stressful, laden places? Who else is willing to go there and stay there in that mud with a client and then talk about avenues out of the mud when they have grown attached to the people they're in the mud with, or they're naturally attached to the people they're in the mud with? So the mother started getting her own counseling and not using her daughter as a therapist. Her daughter, it was really hard for her daughter to give up her therapist role with her mother. And by the way, she wasn't a therapist for her mother in a healthy way. You can't be a family member's therapist and it ever be healthy. I know I rarely make dogmatic statements. That's one of the few I'll make. So by exercising her will to power, it was actually a will to violence in that particular relationship. And will to power isn't necessarily a will to violence. Sometimes it's very nurturing and very helpful. But in this case, it was very disruptive. The more and more she became herself and exercised her authentic voice, the more and more it changed a very fundamental and very important dynamic to her, and a very fundamental and important dynamic to her mother. And likewise, some of you have experienced this. that when you have really spoken the voice of who you are, the relationships that have been damaged or lost that way. Like some of you have been disowned, some of you have been left behind by family or by loved ones when you started to speak the voice that you have. It's one of the consequences of exercising the will to power. Likewise, it's what you gain. That those of us who have been marginalized now find strength with others in the margins. So, one of the things that you would be mindful of as an existential therapist is the ways in which guilt and anxiety and shame are all potentially manifestations of failure to live up to one's will to power, to live up to one's authentic life. Now, it tends to be, and you're open to it being, it's not always necessarily this case. Shame is more likely to be an issue of failure to live up to a will to power. Guilt sometimes can be. Depression and anxiety sometimes can be. But it's always on the table as something to explore. How it is that in the short term, by sacrificing the illusion of the illusion that you've put forward by living this conformist life, that when you break that illusion, the consequences that come up with it, but then the person who grows out of that is much healthier and much more mighty. So helping people become who they really are. Now, an existentialist, though, would say the existential therapist doesn't get to dictate to the clients who they are. The existential therapist is the one who helps them break the shackles around their identity for them to explore and find out who they are. So, one of the things that existential psychologists are critical of is mainstream scientized, pseudoscientific psychology. And they evoke this construct called nothingness. And that's where we approach human beings objectively. Not when we do something, like we treat ourselves or others like an object, we rob ourselves or others of subjectivity, and so everything they are and everything they're doing in terms of their humanity becomes nothing. They cease being human and instead become mere objects. So when we give over our desires, our efforts, our trying, and we just just become a cog in the treadmill of life, then we're treating ourselves as nothing. Likewise, when we look at other people objectively, we treat them as nothing as well. And nothingness is one of the primary ways to relate inauthentically to self and other. So, this relates back to causes, right? The four causes that we talked about and how it is that we kind of modify Aristotle's philosophy of the causes for our own ends. But these causes, material, efficient, formal, and final, if you remember, material is the substance of a thing, causes the thing. In the case of human beings, it's our biology causes us, so our neurochemistry, our neurophysiology. Then efficient is the way something is shaped through space and time causes what it is. In the case of human beings, it's nurture, right? The way in which we are shaped over time by how we're treated, how we're raised, etc. Then formal is the context of a thing causes the thing, internally and externally. And so this particular contextual way of thinking means that anything that I am is always already in relation to everything that contextualizes it. So in the case of a human being, there's a context of humanity, and there's a context of inhumanity, there is a context of depression, and there's a context of mental health. And the formal causal thinkers tend to look at things very contextually. Likewise, the final cause, the purpose of the thing causes the thing, right? The purpose of your behavior is the cause of the behavior. And so that's why it's called teleology. It's like forward thinking, that what is causing me to give this lecture today is the fact that a couple of my students will watch it, okay? So that is my intent for doing what I'm doing. Now, what gets potentially confusing from an existential point of view, I'd like to really wrestle with you guys, not wrestle with us, but let's together wrestle with this idea. From a final causal frame, bodies are important and are a part of the purpose of what we're doing. History, our experience, right? Our cultural experiences, the experience of our people, the experience of our society, as well as our individual experience, is a part of the purpose of what we're doing. Likewise, our current context is a part of what we're currently doing. So, what is meaningful and I think important is the formal and final cause take up bodies, like neurobiology, neurochemistry, etc., as very important. And history, personal history, shared history, as very important. And so some students read that and go, oh, so the final cause includes the efficient and material cause. And the answer is no. It includes the importance of bodies and body stuff and how that informs the purpose and context of what we're doing, and history, personal experience, upbringing, etc., and how that informs the context and purpose of what we're doing. But cause means that this has a cause and effect relationship with that in a direct linear way. Okay? A causes B. From this more formal and final way of thinking, A relates to B, and a ton of other things relate to B as well. And B changes the nature of A. It's very confusing, but a few simple-minded examples may help. I am not standing while I teach, right? When you take your pedagogy class, one of the things you'll be taught is you need to stand, either remain standing or frequently stand when you teach. That people tend to pay better attention when somebody's teaching, and I'm sitting. Well, I'm sitting for multiple reasons. One is I'm constrained by the context of space. I'm a big man in a small area. So that's one. My back hurts. As you guys know, I have a lot of arthritis in my back, and so therefore it's more comfortable if I'm going to be sitting here for 3 hours at a stretch filming these lectures to be doing so in a seated position. And so my biology, the back dysfunction, the space I'm in, is informing what I'm doing, but none of it is causing it, okay? Meaning that it's not a one-to-one, A causes B. Instead, I can get up, and sometimes you'll see me get up and jot something down on the whiteboard or walk towards the camera or whatever else, that I can get up, and I do. A doesn't cause B, but instead A is important in relation to B. My sitting down is important in relation to my back pain. My sitting down is important in my relationship with teaching this lecture in this particular format. It is all related but not causative. And so think of formal and final thinking as my biology informs my behavior and is an important part of my behavior, but it doesn't directly cause my behavior most of the time, most of the ways. Like if I have an issue with dopamine or serotonin, that will manifest in my behavior in some ways, and sometimes some significant ways, but at other times less significant ways and sometimes immeasurable ways. So therefore A relates to B, but A doesn't cause B. Likewise, if I take identical twins, raise them in the same family, they are going to have similar and different experiences. Therefore, A, their upbringing does not cause B, their behavior, but instead it's important that they had those experiences in relation to their behavior without their experiences directly causing their behavior. So it's really interesting and important to wrap your head around the word cause. The word cause means a linear relationship where I tip this domino over in childhood and it causes this effect in adulthood. It's a linear path, right? Cause effect over time. Likewise with biology, that I twist this neuron or I tweak this neurochemical and it causes this direct effect of this thing over here happening, right? Of an improved well-being or a decrease in well-being. To give you an idea, a client came to me a few months ago and she very earnestly asked if she needed to meet with our doctor there in the clinic to see about getting on an antidepressant pill because she thinks there's something wrong with her serotonin and dopamine. She was a psychology major back in the day. She's familiar with these constructs. And so certainly there's biological things going on with her. One of the things, though, that an existential thinker would wonder, is there more going on than biology, and how it is that what's going on with her informs her biology within that context, and how that biology and what's going on in her environment together inform her sense of well-being. Well, she's living with an emotionally abusive, pretty toxic boyfriend, and he is very possessive of her. He's the kind of guy that installed a device on her phone, an app on her phone, where at any time he can hit a button on his phone and it will show him exactly where she is. And if she is anywhere that he does not expect her to be, he blows up her phone with text messages, Marco Polos, attempts to call. Who are you seeing? Who are you having sex with right now? Of course, he doesn't speak that G-rated a language, but it's that very controlling, and he presumes that anything she is doing, she's cheating on him. Okay, and he's very narcissistic, and by the way, he cheats on her constantly. But if she steps so much as an inch out of line, he is very emotionally and verbally violent with her. And so, when she's saying maybe there's something wrong with my dopamine and my serotonin, probably there is. And maybe a pill will help. But from an existential point of view, in fact, from any of these fourth dimensional theories, Buddhist, Christian, existential, Gestalt, they're going to wonder if the relationship between the pill and the boyfriend is as significant as the relationship between her pill and her physiology, right? Meaning that in this toxic relationship, the medication will have a different effect than it will if she was in a healthy relationship. And in fact, the antidepressant pill may not help very much at all, given that she's in a toxic relationship. So it's not a simple A causes B. And likewise, some of the observations I've made, and you guys have seen some of my research, is neurochemically, there are different things going on with us neurochemically depending on the context we're in. And it's not an A causes B kind of relationship, meaning that what I had for breakfast is a part of this conversation. My intention about what's going on later today is a part of this conversation. All of these things are going on all at once, okay? In a way that they're all mutually informing one another, where if I change one, it changes the other subtly or in a big way. So that's why they don't use, like, if you come up to an existential or any fourth dimensional thinker and say, oh, so your theory includes the material and efficient cause, they will correct you and say, no, it doesn't. It includes the importance of the body, and it includes the importance of history, but in an informative, like a correlational way rather than a causative way. So they don't use the word cause. They use the word informed or influenced, not caused. And so that's an important, meaningful distinction. Like, it may even come up on like the final exam in this class is, does the final cause include the material and efficient and formal cause? And the answer is no, it doesn't. Right? Does it include the importance of the body, of history, and of context? Yes, it does. But that's different than a causal relationship. So, right, guys, correlation and causation aren't the same thing. And so there's influenced and informed and nudged, but not directly caused, because everything informs everything else. So when we take this kind of formal and final, the importance of the body, the importance of history, the importance of purpose, the importance of context, and we squish that all away and go back to the material and efficient cause, we're treating people as nothing, right? That you have no say in your behavior, you're merely a stimulus response robot. We're all just moist robots. And the existentialists really object to that. They go, no, we are beings, we are subjects, Dasein, being in the world, that we have subjectivity, that we have meaning and purpose for life. And if you reduce this just down to nature and nurture, you're taking away a lot of what it means to be human. You're treating us as nothing. Okay? Likewise, I'm sure you've seen people treat themselves as nothing. Like, people who are in unhealthy relationships often pull away from their own needs and their own wants and their own desires. Like, it's been a couple months ago, a young lady was in my office, and she comes in and she says, Doc, you're going to be so proud of me because I finally loved myself more than I loved a guy. And I'm like, cool, that sounds wonderful. What do you mean by that? And she talked about how it is that she had a relationship with a guy, and it became very sexually intimate very quickly. And then after about 3 weeks of seeing each other hours a day, every day, in this very kind of hot, passionate way, he one day after sex just says, I'm falling in love with you. I can't have that, and just leaves, ghosts her, leaves her text on read, won't respond to email, doesn't return her calls. 6 months go by, and she's at work, and they're consulting with another firm, and who walks in? this guy. But in those 6 months, she started dating another guy at work who was sweet and caring and loving and emotionally available, and she really thinks he's a beautiful human being. But this guy, that her former lover, walks in, and she starts craving his sexual attention again. So she dumps the sweet guy at work, and they have a whirlwind, hot, sexual, passionate, and within weeks they're living together, and he's very jealous and possessive of her time. He demands to have full access to her phone and to see where she's at and who she's talking to at all times, while at the same time very private about his. He has 2 different metrics of security on his phone. She can never see it, and he's on his phone all the time. But anytime she tries to get a peek at his screen, he turns it off and just looks at her like, what? You know what I mean? And so she comes to find out that he's cheating on her. She confronts him. He becomes physically violent, throws her against a wall, cracks the sheetrock. They have a big screaming match. He leaves. He calls back a minute later, all apologetic. I love you, baby. I can't live without you, baby, etc. This happens 3 times, and finally she loves herself enough to say, nope, you're moving out, because he moved in with her. And he does the whole, but I'll kill myself without you, etc. And she finally loved herself more than him. Unfortunately, the story doesn't have a good ending, but the existential way of taking this up, of interpreting it, it's not about self-love. She stopped treating herself as nothing, right? She stopped using herself as an object to please him, and started exercising her will to power. She started acting like someone rather than a thing. So rather than being a thing for him to manipulate and control, and her capitulation in that, she started exercising her will to power and asserting herself. And of course, he did what abusive people do, and that is try to remove her will to power, try to punish her will to power, to try to make her back into an object that would please him. So somebody's saying, why doesn't this have a happy ending? Because I found out a couple weeks ago she's living with him again. You know what I mean? She's back to treating herself as nothing, back to suppressing her voice, back to suppressing her. And she came in, and I asked her about it. She did the whole guilt, he won't look me in the eyes, and that she's just learned that if she lets him have affairs, then he doesn't emotionally beat her up. So treating herself as nothing again. So scientifically, we can treat other people as nothing. Interpersonally, he's treating her as nothing, and she's buying into that and treating herself as nothing. And likewise, we can treat somebody as something, right? Better yet, someone. Imagine a research. Neighbor's dog just got my dog's attention. So imagine a line of research where you take up your subjects not as objects to be studied, but as beings with whom to relate, right? That you don't just give people surveys and say, oh, well, my stimulus response, moist robotism, they put these marks on a paper and empiricism, so results of my study. Instead, you would actually relate to them. You might give them a survey, but then you might show them the results of your survey and ask them what it means. And own your part of you being the writer of the survey and how it is you wrote it and why you wrote it that way. So these particular thinkers are often champions of qualitative research, phenomenological research, theoretical research, not just marks on Qualtrics research. They want to treat their research subjects not as objects, but as actual subjects, as co-participants in the study. So one of the things that it takes from an existential frame to be authentic is activity. It takes deliberate and constant effort to unfold and blossom into the world as a subjective self. And we see children do that at a very young age, where they start to blossom into the world. Unfortunately, our world is very good at cutting their petals off, right? Of trimming them back down in a way that is easier for other people to manage. So when we face the fact of becoming human is when we feel alive, when we are embracing our subjectivity, living into life the way we want to live it. And at the same time, it's a hot, risky endeavor. You can and will fail sometimes. You can and will try sometimes. You can and will succeed sometimes. Merely being without becoming is a dead, flavorless existence. That you're just going through the motions in life. Everything is taupe and bland oatmeal. That you don't actually live into your potential. So this echoes a little bit of Alfred Adler, right? So if you guys remember our unit on Adler, we talked about how it is that from an Adlerian frame, who you are now is more important than who you were. and who you are becoming is more important still. So there's this real strong existential flavor to Adler, because Adler is reading and is a part of the culture that gives rise to psychological existentialism, like shortly thereafter. Like Paul Ricoeur's Dasein analysis is a... So Paul Ricoeur uses hermeneutic phenomenology, it's interpretivism, and takes that to Freud and then reworks Freud. And so it's a really neat early kind of version of a hermeneutic psychology. And then the existentialists take it up even more intensely some years later. So you never have an end spot for becoming. You're never done. In fact, some write, when you die, you're done. The Christians go, no, you don't. You still got a lot. You got an eternity of unfolding. God is unfolding, right? For the Buddhists, go, no, it's another time around the wheel until you reach nirvana, and nirvana is unfolding with the universe, which is eternal. So some of the secular existentialists know you unfold until you die. And the others go, no, you don't get off that easy. That there will be a perpetual and eternal unfolding. So there's this lovely phrase. If you become what you have planned to be and hope for nothing else, you will be disappointed when you arrive at your destination. You'll be left with, I'm here, now what? That from an existential frame, there's always another comic book to read, another mountain to climb, another class to take, another relationship to experience, another friendship, right? That there's always this constant sense of unfolding, this perpetual sense of unfolding. So never have an end spot for becoming. Don't say, well, I'll be happy when. So if I get to this point, then I'll be happy. If I get to this relationship or this car or this class or this degree or this job, then I'll be happy. Well, first of all, no, that's not the way life works. Happiness doesn't work that way. But second of all, don't have an end spot. Go, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to look around and see what's next. So don't have your happiness dependent upon. Live while you are being. Live while you are doing what you're doing. So some of you have heard my horror stories of graduate school. Because Texas at Austin needed to add millions and millions of dollars to remodel their stadium for their football team, they took money away from academics to pay for athletics. And by the way, that's the way it works. Because by regulation standards, universities can't directly profit from athletics, but athletics can suck money out of academics to support itself. It's corrupt, it's evil, it's vile, and that's why many of us stand very strongly against UVU having a football team. Because it will suck money out of academics, but it won't bring anything back to the university. You know what I mean? We can't have scholarships based on football revenue. We can't do any of that thing. Instead, athletics takes but doesn't give back. So I lost all of my funding, not through any fault of my own, and now I'm working multiple jobs and having to take out student loans all at the same time, averaging 3 hours of sleep a night, and that lasted for about 4 years, almost 5. So even then, I would have a date night on either Friday or Saturday night every week, and Dungeons and Dragons was 2 hours every Wednesday. You know what I mean? Yes, I was in the salt mine. Yes, I was working, 21 hours a day, 7 days a week. But I still found time here and there to enjoy life, right? Make your life. I started to be very selective and very picky. That rather than taking the easy practica and internships, instead, I would choose the practicum and internships where I would be treated well, right? Unfortunately, there was not a variety of professors who taught every class. If a professor taught a class, that's the only professor who taught that class, and so I couldn't be choosy there. So that would sometimes be very uncomfortable for me, and very uncomfortable for the professors sometimes. But other areas of my life, I tried to make those parts of my life meaningful and important, even if they were difficult, okay? So live your life while you're there. Don't put living off until later. Yes, there's a lot of heavy demands. Cows got to be milked. Dig your ditches early. I get up early in the morning and I do this. I try to do all the things, the hard things early in my day, so that way later I can have meetings with students and I can, chat with my colleagues and I can heaven forbid this evening, play some video games, that there are things that I can do, and I try to do them early. And it's not, well, I'll be happy then. No, I also find this job meaningful. I'd much rather you all were here, and we get breakfast together, James makes amazing pancakes. I'm a fair hand with other breakfast dishes. Like, we just sit around, and next time it'll be your turn to fix breakfast. I wish we could do that right now. But that's what we would do. We'd get together, and we would have these kind of conversations around this very large dining room table. So, engage in activity. Be. Unfold. Where you are, given that you're working, you're going to school, life is stressful, find a few minutes here and there to unfold yourself in new and creative ways. So there is a relationship with activity, though, and is not all activity we engage in is necessarily healthy. So there is a form of activity called bad faith. Bad faith is, if you guys can see in my notes, this is a way of living by which we let ourselves down by not really fulfilling the possibilities open to us in life. If we choose to do nothing or blame on others, like our behavior on another, we're acting in bad faith because we've actually already chosen our set of behaviors. When we're not living responsible for our activity, then we're acting in bad faith because we're not really living up to what we could be doing. So a quote from Yalom, there is no escaping the existential predicament of having to be. That you are always the one that is responsible for you. Now, they're also very clear, you're not responsible for others. That's where the Buddhists and the Christian existentialists kind of go, sometimes sort of, we're morally obligated for the other. Psychological secular existentialists say, no, we're not. So, a few examples of bad faith. Working in the addictions field, relapse is common. And it takes a lot of strength, a lot of help, a lot of determination, a lot of luck, sometimes to get sober. And so, last week, 2 clients relapsed pretty hard. And as clinical director, it often lands on my desk as to what to do about them in terms of their continuing the program or discontinuing this program and being referred to what's called a higher level of care or inpatient treatment. Now, from the therapist's end, it is doing what is in the best needs of the client to serve them, and hopefully after they're done at inpatient, they'll come back to our outpatient. The clients take it up and use it as, you're kicking me out, this is so unfair, I can't believe you're doing this to me. And that shows bad faith, right? They're not understanding. It's very clear in our intake procedure. Here is our program. You can either work this program or not, but if you're not working this program and we're billing you or your insurance company for something that you're not doing, we need to discontinue the program with you. And if you are of need, where you are engaging in an unhealthy behavior like using illicit drugs, and you're persisting on doing that, we can't have you persist on our program because our program is a don't do drugs program. And so we will refer you to a higher level of care where you're under 24-hour monitoring, where it's very difficult to use drugs in that particular setting. And so there were 2. And in chatting with both of these people, one owned what he had done. He said, here's the situation, I got into this situation, it's always a risky situation for me, and I used for these reasons, I'm really feeling upset, like I can't believe I let myself down, I'm so sorry I let you guys down, I want to change, can you help me come up with a prevention plan, because I often find myself in these particular situations. And so he and I put together a plan. The second guy comes in and he goes, it's not me, man. It's your test is broken and it's wrong and it's not fair and so and pointing fingers and that person got referred to a higher level of care, right? They're acting in bad faith. That the first person acts in good faith. They owned their activity, their responsibility, right? That I was unfolding in this way, and I unfolded in a way that informed a relapse, and I would like not to do that again. I'd like to unfold being in a different way. I'd like to become a different person. And whereas the other person, it's no responsibility. It's denial of activity, treating themselves as nothing. They're just a helpless object that is their behavior is being caused by everyone around them. And therefore, they need a higher level of care, because if they're just an object that's being caused by other people, then they have no choice and no responsibility for their behavior. Therefore, they can't be outside of an inpatient setting, because anything or everything will cause them to use drugs, potentially overdose, and potentially die. And so the existentialists give you a litmus test by which to determine how engaged a client is, and that is, are they acting in good faith? Right? In fact, this becomes a litmus test for many of your relationships. Imagine a friend who is a friend but in bad faith, where if there's a problem in the friendship, it's your fault. That they don't ever do anything wrong. They can be insulting and abrasive and nasty, but if you have a problem with it, then they're sorry that you have a problem with it, and they're just being them, right? They're acting in bad faith as a friend. Likewise, as a spouse, that imagine a spouse who takes their marital vows very lightly and cheats on their spouse or belittles their spouse in front of their spouse or behind their spouse's back. Imagine us living in bad faith with ourselves, where we beat ourselves up emotionally and we hurt ourselves emotionally, and we refuse to take ownership for that's what we're doing. And so for us to go, I'm beating myself up, I'm using this particular discourse, blaming and shaming myself, I'm going to endeavor to stop doing that. I'm going to figure out ways I can stop. So when we're living in bad faith, when we're living in inauthentic life at that time, that, as I referred to earlier, this creates the phenomenon of anxiety, of dread, of despair, of anomie, of lostlessness and placelessness for being. So there are consequences of ceasing to be an active being, of failing to be authentic. So anxiety is the sickness unto death. I love that phrase. It's very heavy metal. Anxiety is the sickness unto death. It results from alienation, inauthenticity, and failing in one's will to power. Sometimes rather than depression or anxiety, an authentic life manifests as boredom. We demand that life entertain us and give us things, give us stimuli, give us entertainments, rather than going forward and creating or making what happens what we want. We are not malleable to the world is malleable to us, right? If you're bored, do something. Well, I don't know what to do. We'll figure it out, right? That you're just sitting back and saying, I'm bored. Like my kids learned at a young age never to say that around me, because I'm like, well, I'll give you things to do. You know what I mean? You're bored? Let's put you to work. And so they learned early on. I wish they learned not to be bored. Instead, they learned not to tell me about it. So a logical consequence, as Adler would say, of my parenting style. So we latch on to other things in an effort to escape anxiety and confusion in our own lives, like religion, clubs, organizations, money. But sometimes we only further our anxiety and dread when we fail to take up our emptiness of lives head on. So now, some of you say, Matt, are the existentialists saying that joining things is bad? No, that's not the claim. We know it's serving an authentic purpose when people join and then leave. Like James, who's sitting here chatting with me, he's being very quiet. He's on his phone a lot. I'm going to tease him about that later. Remember back in Terre Haute, how many people would join the church and then the LDS church and then disappear?
Mm-hmm. It was a lot.
It was a lot. So the retention rate was 25%.
Wow. Meaning
that after a year after baptism, only 25% of the people who were baptized into the LDS faith remained LDS. 25%. That's remarkable. In fact, I found out that's actually a little bit higher than the international average.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So therefore, there was bad faith on two sides. One is, I need something to fill the emptiness in my life, says the convert, so they latch onto this religion, and then the religion doesn't provide that emptiness to fulfill that emptiness, and so they leave. But likewise, sometimes religions promise fulfillment that religions can't actually deliver in the way they promise. And so therefore, some of these people leave feeling betrayed. It's very fun for me, speaking of anxiety, dread, and despair, and bad faith, that the LDS mission thing, I get a big kick out of, because almost half now of, and this is missionaries in this region, so Utah, Idaho, Arizona, etc., almost half leave the church within 5 years, many right after their mission. Okay? And I really enjoy this statistic, and it's two parts. Many people go into their mission with bad faith, right? They're just doing it out of cultural expectation or cultural demands, parental demands, etc., rather than going, I'm a passionate warrior for Mormonism, and that's why I'm going to do what I do. And then, on the other side of bad faith, I've noticed that I never hear bad mission stories over the pulpit at church. Those people stay silent and ashamed of themselves in the congregation. The people who really struggled and really fought hard just to stay on their mission and just to stay healthy or alive don't stand up and say, the mission was the most brutal thing I ever went through. It wasn't, happiness and made me healthy and shiny. Instead, it wrecked me in some ways, and I'm still struggling with faith because of my mission. There's tons of stories out there nobody's allowed to be told. And so there's bad faith on two sides. One, I'm just going to do what mommy and daddy want and go on a mission. And on the other side, promises of happiness and girls and stuff and cars and good jobs, etc. if you do. And those promises I know are tacit. So an example, I guess former friend of mine, he refuses to speak to me anymore. But we were known as the Twin Towers back in high school. And yes, just like those towers, our towers fell as well. So whereas I'm 6'5", he was 6'4", and on Fluffy, he is chiseled and cut. So he had the Superman build. And me, even though I was very muscular at the time, it was more like an old school world wrestler. Kind of like Hulk Hogan and Andre the Giant had a kid. So my friend, also named Matt, was extremely promiscuous in high school. Lots and lots of girls. Lots and lots of lovers. But he would also be in church, bright and shiny, blessing the sacrament, the whole 9 yards, right? And I think part of him really was endeavoring to be a faithful person. I think part of him was also indifferent to faith and really just wanted to get his rocks off. I noticed he wasn't a good or skilled lover. He was just using girls to sexually gratify himself. How do I know? Because many of these girls would become friends of mine after he had destroyed their genitals and their hearts. And so it comes about time for mission, and I don't believe the LDS Church was true the way missionaries are required, or at the time were required to teach that it was true. So I said, in good conscience, in good faith, I can't go. And so disowned, all sorts of other problems unfolded out of my life because of that. Where he went on a mission. While he was on his mission, he had at least 2 affairs with married women that we know about. And returned with honor, etc. And because his former mission companions started writing letters home about the behaviors of this other Matt, he knew the jig was up when he got home. So the same day he got home, he confessed to his stake president father about what he'd done. And his own father had to hold a church court on him and excommunicate him. Well, a year later, after his mission, we're at a social gathering, a party, and he is going around flirting with a lot of the young ladies, which he usually does, very, very successfully for him, very unsuccessfully for them in terms of how he treats them later. But while we're sitting around, I noticed that he would use me as a foil. He would use me as a bad object. He would say, I went on a mission, I went to this mission, it was such a spiritual experience, it was great, and the girls would be like, ah! And then he would point me out and say, Draper here didn't go on a mission, and they'd be like, ugh. And so I would find myself being shunned at this social gathering because I was not a missionary, and I refused to be a missionary. And so it was really neat watching him swipe his credit card, his golden credit card of returned missionary. It got him a lot of girls. He got married shortly thereafter, cheated on that wife a lot by accessing emotionally vulnerable people and playing up the religious side of things. And he had bishops pay rent because he could swipe that golden credit card. He could have, he could play that game at work and get promotions. He just swiped that credit card, right? That golden credit card. All of that was bad faith. At the same time, though, those of us who knew him personally know him to be an extremely miserable human being. Right? There's a lot of this anxiety, dread, and despair of being. He's not relating authentically to these other people. He's not really relating authentically to himself. He's living a bifurcated life, right? He's on the one hand highly promiscuous and highly worldly, and on the other hand super, super religious. And those two worlds don't fit well together. So it's really rather absurd. Oh, and by the way, the reason he stopped speaking to me is he brought his sons over, his 13 and 14-year-old son. Huh?
We got 1 minute left.
1 minute left? The battery burned out that fast?
No, it's 49 minutes into your lecture.
Oh, thank you, bud. Got the timer going. And so I taught his sons how to throw knives and axes, and I was sharing stories of our adolescence. I didn't know this, but he had not shared stories of his wild and woolly behaviors with his own sons. And so when I was talking about the time that he was having doggy-style sex with a young lady in the Orem Public Library when he was 15, he got very angry at me, started yelling at me how inappropriate that was, and he's not wrong, I guess. But at the same time, I thought he'd been open because he's so crass and vulgar when he's around the guys. I made the mistake of thinking that he was that crass and vulgar all the time. And so I just pulled him aside while he's yelling at me and saying, you have a lot of moral lessons you could teach your boys. Instead, they haven't had any sex education in the home. They don't know everything you've done. And you could teach them very effective lessons, which you're not doing. And that was been about 6 years ago, and he hasn't spoken to me since.
That'd be a good reason to... If you're stuck up in your own head, that'd be a good reason to not continue to speak with somebody.
Amen, right? So let's go ahead and pause this for now, and we'll finish up our unit on existential therapy next time.